Bob, are you ready for the episode?
Slay!
Bob says that we can start the episode now, so without further ado. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedal Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Safari Podcast Zoo Crazy Wild Thing bandwagon. It's great to have you. Today. And I'll say it one more time. Today, we are continuing the amazing, the so wonderful, the educational, the inspirational Clienting 101 miniseries. I've only been in the music industry, I would say out of audio school. Right now, let's do the math.
I finished audio school in June, and now it is April, so right now, June.
10 months. I've been in the music industry officially, fresh out of audio school for 10 months. Obviously, I have a lot to learn about many things in music and both about everything, okay? Learning curves all day, every day. But especially when it comes to clienting in general, I have never had a paid client. Not yet. And I know that, like many things, learning comes with being on the job and experiencing, but I really wanted to do another mini-series about this in general to just soak up all of the clienting knowledge goodness before I head out into the crazy Safari client world by myself, if that makes sense. So on that note, we have a very special guest. Gloria Kaba is going to be on the show, and we're going to be discussing her clienting experience, things that she's learned, tips she has for new producers and engineers who are starting out, and just her view and take on the whole amazing, wonderful world of clienting. So I feel like there's not much more I can add to this intro. So guys, please give a very warm Safari welcome to Gloria Kaba.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being on.
Of course. Thank you for reaching out. I'm really excited to, get into it, have a conversation with you.
Same here. I've been really anticipating this episode. Before we dive in, let's start with who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
Amazing. Yeah, my name is Gloria Kaba. I'm a producer engineer based in New York. As a young person, I knew I wanted to be involved in the creative part of music. I knew I wanted to produce, and I knew I wanted to songwrite. And it wasn't until I got to college where I started to become educated on the role of the engineer. So really was able to learn things on the technical side and how all of those things overlap. So I went to college, took recording classes, and then I got a job at a studio right out of college where I worked for about 6 years. And I started out as a runner. Then I made it to assistant engineer where, I was able to work on things, ranging from, musical theater and jazz and pop and hip hop. So it was really great to see people from all sort of walks of life and all different genres work, and was able to be in the room with, people like Madonna and Beyonce and Frank Ocean and Watch the Throne. I was a mix assistant on Watch the Throne, assisted for Aretha Franklin, so on and so forth. So it was just a great list of people. After I left the studio, I started working closely with the artist and producer Q-Tip, who's a legend. So really got to watch him work and, as his engineer, and really soak in, again, all the things that come with being a producer. And then after that, I sort of got back into working with indie artists on the engineering, production, and mixing end. And that's a lot more of what I do now, mostly producing and mixing. So recently I took on the role as technical director at Power Station at Berkeley NYC, where I manage the staff and coordinate the technical details of sessions. So it's been a really fun road, and I've been, all around, again, working for studios, working with indie artists and major artists. So, I feel like I have a lot to say about clienting at different levels and working with teams. So just really excited to share all of that with you today.
If we go back to the beginning of your career, like how far in did it take you to get your first, you can say maybe paid client, or what was that process like for you?
I guess like my first official experience, I mean, there were a few years at the beginning where I was working with friends and, most often than not getting paid anything, but I didn't care. It was all about like getting the experience. I'd say 3 years in, I started to get like official engineering gigs, and it was a bit of a learning curve because I just thought that, all right, we agreed to work a certain amount of hours. You know what I worked, I know what I worked, and you'll just send me a check, or you know what I mean. I just figured that it was that easy. And then a while went by, and I'm like, I'd reach out to people and they're like, oh, you didn't send me an invoice. I'm like, well, what is that? So at that point, I had reached out to some colleagues of mine who were, about the same level, but had done a few more paid gigs. And, they taught me how to create an invoice, send that out, and, also creating the habit of following up with people. So it took a few years, but really, it really just took me kind of reaching out to colleagues who had a little bit more experience, but no one tells you. So if you don't invoice, then you're not going to get paid. So there's that.
Guys, you heard it here first. Invoices.
Yeah.
Invoices. When that experience first happened, did the person receive it well?
When I reached out to them initially, it was just like, oh, you didn't send me an invoice. It wasn't like, they were offended, or I think they realized I didn't know what the process was. So no, it went fine after I knew what the process was like. But, sometimes you can't get paid right away. Sometimes there's sort of this net 30 days that most people keep to. Other times you're chasing people for months. And, I've also had people say, oh, yeah, I haven't paid you because my client hasn't paid me. So sometimes it's a waiting game. And, I, as a freelancer, at that point, I was still working for a studio, so I wasn't hurting for the money. But as a freelancer, it's important to sort of plan ahead, because you can't really predict how much you're going to make on a biweekly or monthly basis based on the work you're doing. Because, the agreement might be that you'll get paid right away, but you may be waiting a month to several months.
The years have gone by and you have a lot more experience under your belt. Have you kind of developed a do's and don'ts when approaching paid clients, the interpersonal relationship side, money, whatever that may be?
I mean, talk about money as early as possible. I mean, sometimes it can feel a little awkward, but just to avoid all confusion, it's definitely best to, have that conversation as early as possible. So if someone reaches out to you, and we're talking about engineering, because the roles in music, as far as how you get paid and when you get paid can differ a little bit. But I think engineering is a good place to start, because it's more, you're providing a service and you're usually paid for that service sooner than not. All around, talk about what the business arrangement is going to be pretty early on in the process. So if someone calls you, say you're engineering, they want you to engineer or mix or whatever the case may be, find out all aspects of the project, find out the scope of the project, because sometimes you can agree to something that seems like really straightforward and simple. And then once you get into the weeds of it, you're kind of working forever and you just didn't realize how long it would take. But talking about getting the money conversation out the way in the beginning, letting them know what your rate will be, if it's hourly, if it's daily, is it project based? If you're mixing, does your rate include revisions? How many revisions? Is there any editing included? So just realizing the different roles you're playing within a project and basing your rate on that.
What's your take kind of on contracts?
I mean, for straightforward engineering projects, I never really sign contracts. For more of the creative stuff, so for production projects where, there's back end, there's publishing, that's where you'll see contracts come into play. I mean, it can't hurt. I have done engineering projects where the client has actually presented me with one, just stating, this is a work for hire, confirming my hourly, daily rate, whatever editing or mixing that's done isn't included in that rate, so on and so forth. So I've had clients who sort of are good at business and are business minded and understand the complications that can come from not getting that out the way. But standard practice for engineers or mixers, there's never usually a contract.
Kind of like on the interpersonal side of things, like when it comes to the relationship between an engineer and an artist, when it comes to these kinds of conversations, do you find that there's maybe a certain way that artists prefer to be approached about these things?
I haven't taken note of a certain tone. I mean, generally, you want to be friendly and easygoing, but you do have to be clear. The more clear you are, again, the less confusion there will be moving forward. So I think most people appreciate that, as opposed to sort of sugarcoating things or beating around the bush or trying to avoid those conversations. And then it's weird, down the line. I feel like people appreciate you being clear about, payment. However, I think the approach I try to take also in understanding the scope of the project and the personnel involved, if it is an indie artist, are they paying out of pocket? do they have representation? Do they have, is management taking care of it? Is there a label, an indie label, or some other entity helping them out? If not, I try to take that into consideration. So, I might say, here are my standard rates, but it's negotiable based on your situation and based on the scope of the project. And I think people appreciate that because they might get, spooked when they see what your standard rate is, but that doesn't mean we can't have a conversation. So I think if you approach it in that way, people appreciate that. And it helps you to sort of state your value, because when I'm giving discounts to people, I just want them to know, well, usually it's this, but based on our relationship and this particular situation, I'm charging you this. But that also, this discounted special rate may not apply for every project we do. So there might be a subsequent project that comes about. And I'm like, great, I gave you a deal on the other project, but this, for whatever reason, I'm going to charge higher or my standard rate based on the situation. So just being clear and direct and flexible when you can be.
All of the people that I've spoken to thus far on the show, it doesn't matter what the topic of the episode is, it all goes back to just being a kind person and being someone that's like easy to work with. So I guess that's like kind of the secret sauce.
I think people underestimate that, the value of just being likable and friendly and the type of person that people want to be in the room with for hours and hours on end. There are these soft skills that we learn that I hope we pick up. And some are just natural to certain people, these things are harder to teach than the technical things. So, when I'm mentoring people or just giving advice, I always push those soft skills because those are going to get you further. And the technical stuff you can learn and you'll pick up, but it's these soft skills that you really have to pay attention to that I don't think comes natural to all people. But definitely there's a lot to be said about just being easygoing, friendly, and a good person that I don't think is mentioned often enough.
Guys, just like be decent and sounds like things will go okay. Is there something that you see new producers and engineers doing that you'd kind of like to call attention to? Hey guys, maybe like let's kind of flip the perspective.
I think you do have to consider where you are in your career and base your rate on that. Sometimes people will reach out to me to ask me my rates and base their rates on my rates but they're just starting out. And like, maybe that might not be appropriate, but also, get what you can get. If someone has the budget to pay you a certain thing, finding out what that is, you should definitely shoot for it. But you should be realistic, find out what the people working in your field at your level are getting. And I think that people will, you'll just be more informed about where to start. But then also, I think the mistake I see more often than that is people actually undervaluing themselves, doing things at just much cheaper rates just to get the gig. Because what that does is it once you decide that you want to charge a higher rate, then you kind of get, if you're working with a repeat client, you might get questioned on what that is, or you might just be doing this work and not getting what you should be getting at that point. Let's be, to be honest, like you can't be taken advantage of in the music industry. Like, surprise, not a surprise. But you don't want to be taken advantage of. You want to be informed. You want the work. Obviously, it's exciting to be able to say that you're getting paid for something you love to do, but you do have to be business minded and take it seriously.
I want to quickly get your take on this. Are you for people in the beginning working for free to kind of avoid that undervaluing and then suddenly raising their rate?
Yes, I'm for people working for free. It depends on what it is. Early on, I worked with friends who were also artists. And at that point, I was learning to engineer, I was learning to produce, I was learning to mix. And I did most of it for free. And I did it because I was learning and not because I felt like, I won't even say I didn't feel like my work, my contributions weren't worth anything, but I was happy to, we weren't working with a deadline. So we were just kind of working on a rolling basis. So I'm all for people working for free in the beginning. And also, even down the line, there are things I do with my friends that I don't necessarily charge for. There might be more of a sort of like a bartering that's unspoken to where, I might have a friend who's a graphic designer and also a rapper. And sometimes I might track them for free because I know that I can get, some graphic design or whatever the case may be. So there are these unspoken trade-offs or spoken, they can be clear. These trade-offs, you can have arrangements you can have with people that don't involve money. But it does get to a point where you have to go, okay, is this a situation where I should be getting paid for my services? Because then there are those same friends who I was doing work for free in the beginning, who I did end up charging at some point. But it's different for everybody. It's really about you and knowing when you want to take that step. And maybe it's not always a good idea. If someone reaches out to you and it's like, hey, I want you to mix this thing. I have no budget. I have no money. We have no relationship. There's no real trade-off here. Well, then you should probably be charging.
It sounds like kind of the key to these situations in general are like, one, reading the room, and then like touching on just being easygoing. And it sounds like things will kind of iron itself out.
Yes, unless it's about money, because then that doesn't always get ironed out. So, you know what I mean? So there's a balance about like, being easygoing, being friendly, but being clear and direct about payment and what the business aspects of this relationship are.
Would you say that ability to be direct in your rates and what your work is that like a muscle that you really had to flex for a long time to build?
Definitely. 100%. I mean, it's an awkward conversation, but once you do it for a while, you realize like people expect it. I know it's strange that people don't lead with that. I do. If I'm hiring someone to do something for me, that's one of the first questions I'm asking. It's like, are you available to do this thing? Do you have any interest in the project? What is your rate? What can we, what arrangement can we make? So it's surprising that most people or entities, companies, artists, whatever, don't lead with that. But it's definitely something that, I think people understand is coming at some point.
To kind of sum up the whole topic of clienting, I guess that's a word, I made that up maybe, clienting and the whole interpersonal relationship side. Is there something that, well, usually I ask our guests to give either a piece of advice or something they want to say to the amazing Studio Animal viewers. So is there anything else that you'd like to say to the people?
Yeah, you really just have to, like, one, learn your craft, be humble, especially in the beginning, and understand that there are many people who get lucky and catch a break really early on, but that doesn't happen for most people. So it may be years before you really see the fruits of your labor, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. I think, going back to your question about what I see from aspiring, producers, engineers, creatives in the music industry, one of the things, or I don't know if it's a mistake or it's just not the right mindset in the beginning, is expecting results too soon and giving up too soon or getting down because, you're 2 years out of college and you don't have a number one song. I think you do have to be patient, learn all you can, get into as many situations as possible that, offer an opportunity to learn, whether that's studio, whatever, internship at a management company or some other music company, working for someone directly. So maybe you reach out to a producer or an engineer or another, an artist, and you intern for them, or you find some other way to be valuable. Again, in the beginning, you may not start out doing what you want to do, especially for money. You may have to make money doing something else. And, the advice I always give is make sure it's adjacent to music. If you're looking for paid gigs, maybe, you're great at editing audio and vocal tuning. So you reach out to a producer or engineer who might need those services, but you really would actually you do want to be a producer or a songwriter or whatever it is. Just making sure your skills are varied so that you can get your foot in the door, and just learning as much as you can, being easygoing, being direct, being clear, and not expecting too much at the very beginning. That's the advice I would give.
Low and slow, as they say.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really learned a lot from this conversation, and also I really appreciate your approach.
Yeah, thank you. And like you said, it's a muscle, so you just have to do it, and eventually after a handful of times, it'll become sort of second nature.
Well, I look forward to it being second nature. I'm gonna wait on that day for sure. But thank you so much. Give me a shot and I swear I shoot like Berettas.